Hi, I'm ReFLEXions and welcome to the latest edition of SecondsOut ReFLEXions, our Monday or weekly on Monday look at what's been going on recently in the world of boxing. And this week I want to tackle a rather thorny subject, but one that people, certainly on social media, have been on my case to talk about for a couple of weeks now. And I think most supporters and detractors or critics of Daniel Kinahan would assert that he's a man who likes to stay in the shadows as much as possible. Supporters would say it's because he's selfless and does everything for the fighters, doesn't want to promote himself. His detractors would say it's to hide a multitude of sins. Whatever the reason, when Tyson Fury publicly thanked Kinahan for his role in progressing negotiations for an undisputed heavyweight title or set of title fights between Tyson and Anthony Joshua in 2021, it thrust Kinahan into the spotlight, and I don't think there's any going back now. And he's a hugely controversial figure, and one that, since Fury credited him in that social media speech, has been covered more than he has ever been before. He's been a fixture in Irish newspapers for a long time. Allegedly the head of a criminal gang that are, involved in both violence and drug pushing. People who support Daniel Kinahan will assert, and this is a fact, that he's never been convicted of any offence, and it could be merely hearsay, but there's certainly a lot of smoke regardless of whether there is fire or not. And the Irish newspapers, particularly the crime reporters, have been covering him, his family, the Kinahan family, for a number of years. But just recently, after Fury's announcement, the stories seem to now have spread towards the not just the British newspapers, but the sports sections, probably for the first time outside of Ireland. And I've had a lot of flack on social media, and I'm sure some of the other boxing YouTube channels have too, about not pursuing this angle more aggressively. I interviewed Bob Arum, who's obviously part of Fury's team, last week, and asked him about Daniel Kinahan, but when he was effusive in his praise for the Fury advisor, I didn't push him much further after that. And a lot of people have speculated, not just about that, but generally about boxing YouTube channels not going in deeper to the Daniel Kinahan story. The key concern for us, and I can't speak for any of the other channels, but I can speak for myself and SecondsOut, is that we're worried about losing access to the boxers that he advises and the boxers who are associated with MTK Global, who were founded by Daniel Kinahan, or part founded by Daniel Kinahan, and with whom he maintains a close relationship. Now, don't get me wrong, if all the boxers advised by him and all the MTK Global fighters suddenly decided they'd have nothing more to do with SecondsOut, it'd be an issue. There's no doubt about it. When they decided to do something similar with Irish media because of a similar situation, they had that, what was it, no comment for Irish media campaign, badges that were on the social media profiles. What made me laugh about it, actually, as a bit of an aside, is that a lot of fans seem to put that badge on their social media profile picture, even though they had no real reason to. No one was asking for their comment. But that aside, it was a big deal at the time, and Irish media were barred from MTK events and for speaking to MTK fighters for an extended period. And it hurt. I mean, it hurt the fighters too, because obviously they want to grow their profile, particularly Irish fighters who were unable to get coverage in their home country. But it hurt the media just as much, and I guess that was the idea. They didn't like, MTK didn't like the way they were being covered in certain aspects, and they made a move to counter that, I suppose. And yeah, here at SecondsOut, we wouldn't want that to happen to us. It's just, logic, isn't it? We don't want half the biggest fighters in the UK being off limits to us. But that's not the main reason, certainly, that I haven't delved deeper into this story. So let me kind of explain a couple of factors that people haven't really talked about. One is that it takes a huge amount of research to go through this. And yeah, there is stuff on public record. I'm aware that in open court, it was claimed that Kinahan was head of the biggest drug cartel in Europe, for example. But, as stated before, he's never been convicted of a crime. And to get into all the ins and outs and speak to all the relevant people, to go through all the court transcripts and documents that have been out there, takes a huge amount of time and resource. And this isn't just an excuse. When you work for a national newspaper, like a lot of people covering the story now, you're given those resources. You've got central teams that you can rely on who will help you out with stuff like that. At SecondsOut, and again, I'm not speaking for the other channels, we're a small team. The majority of our production team work across a multitude of channels. We're part of an MCN, a multi-channel network. In terms of people working purely and only for SecondsOut on a full-time basis, it's just me, basically. The production team, our freelance reporters, they all work across other channels too. I'm the only one really who works just for SecondsOut. And as much as I'd like to cover this story as a journalist and someone who from a print journalism background, it does intrigue me, I don't really have the depth of resource to do the story justice. And the worst thing I could do with a story like this is get important elements of it wrong, because the people that criticise us at the moment for not going into this in enough depth would be the same people criticising us if we made some significant errors in doing so. So that's one concern. Another, being frank, is libel and defamation. And that's a kind of byproduct of not being able to go into enough research. Because if you do make a mistake and it defames someone, so if it lowers their reputation in the eyes of the general public, and some people out there, the critics of Daniel Kinahan, will say, well, that's surely not possible given his current reputation. But if it's proved that you claim something that's false and it lowers someone's reputation, you're liable to be sued for it. And again, we do not have the resources particularly to A, guard against that in the first place. We don't have a huge legal team looking over all our content. And B, to fight a high profile court case. You know, we're not backed by a millionaire here. You know, we're not DAZN. we're not owned by a Perform Group or anything like that. We're part of a decent sized multi-channel network, but really we're a small to medium sized business, and we're not going to put everything we've worked hard for on the line to cover something that people are kind of begging us to cover, but it's a small amount of people. And while it's worthy of being covered in more depth, we need to be sure 100% that all our I's are dotted and all our T's are crossed if we're going to jump into that deep end, because there's no going back from it once you do that. You could lose access, yeah, that's important, but I think we'd get around that. We've got access to enough non-MTK fighters, we've got personal relationships with some of their fighters anyway. I think we'd still be alright. But fighting a court case, and more importantly losing potentially a court case, that is a concern, and any sensible business would have to take that into account. And I'm sure the newspapers covering this now have taken that into account, but they've got enough research to cover their backs and enough money to go to court if necessary. That's just a fact. But the last thing, and probably the most important, is public interest. Now, Irish newspapers, particularly in the crime sections, have been covering this story for over a decade, I think. But there's a good reason for it, and it's not just because they feel a sense of responsibility. I'm sure that's part of it. But there's also the fact that people want to read about it. In Ireland, in the crime section, 100%. You know, it's a huge story. In Britain, not so much. Daniel Kinahan's not even a figure that's been talked about much in Britain until he became involved in boxing when he founded MTK Global. And since then, as an advisor to Fury and other boxers, he's become more prominent. But are we at that critical juncture where he's important enough to devote a lot of time and research to it? And just getting down to brass tacks, is he going to generate, and we'll see maybe with this video, is he going to generate the amount of views that might make it worthwhile to risk some of the other stuff I've talked about? You know, like an interview with Anthony Joshua would, or an interview with Tyson Fury would, you know, some of the biggest names in the sport today. Is he up there yet? Because we're not, people aren't on social media criticising me because I work for a national newspaper and we're not covering this in our crime section. They're criticising me and some of my peers because it's not being covered to the extent they would like in a niche, albeit, you know, fairly big, but niche, boxing focused YouTube channel. Now, is he a big enough name in the world of boxing fandom that videos about Daniel Kinahan, talking to people about Daniel Kinahan, including those who are critical of him, would they do particularly well? I don't know. From comments I've read, from other stuff that we've put up that's got mentions of him in it, and he's mentioned in the title and things like that, I'm not convinced he's someone who's going to move the needle particularly, at least not yet. Maybe as Fury Joshua, if it happens, comes closer, maybe that will change. But at the moment, I'm not convinced he's a big enough figure in boxing. And while I understand the moral obligation that people want to put on us to cover him because of all the things that have allegedly happened in Ireland, we don't know being boxing journalists, loads about that. And it's whether it's worth our time and the risks involved to go into the, you know, we're not trained investigative journalists, but I'm sure we could give it a damn good go. But have we got that support, and is there enough there? Is there enough of a carrot, if you like, for us to do all those things? And I'm not sure there is, but it'd be interesting to see what you guys think. And that's the main reason I'm doing this video. And this isn't a video saying, what do you think of Daniel Kinahan? Because I imagine most of the people out there know as much about him as I do. You know, fighters will say he's the best thing since sliced bread. He's selfless. He likes to do everything he can for his fighters, get the most money for them, advises them, always available to them when they need him. Detractors would call him a criminal and a murderer and a variety of other pejorative terms. And truth usually is somewhere in the middle. But I don't know, and I'm sure most of the people out there don't know. What I want to know is, do you want to see us, not just SecondsOut, but I guess boxing YouTube channels in general, cover Daniel Kinahan to a greater degree and to a more critical degree? Does it interest you? Or are you more interested in seeing the fighters and the fights coverage of that? It'd just be really good to know. And I'm not promising that if we get, you know, 90% of the comments saying, oh, we want to know loads more about Daniel Kinahan, that we'll suddenly devote all our resources to it. By all our resources, I mainly do just mean me. But it will certainly help sway our judgment going forward. And it'd be good to know, because we're here to serve you guys. We're here to serve our subscribers and our viewers. And obviously to increase the number of subscribers. And if we think it's something that people are really desperate to know more about, then we have to take that into consideration. But at the moment, I'm not convinced. And I'm not willing to take the risks involved for meagre benefits. So just being really open and honest about it, we are a business, we do need to survive, and we do need to thrive. So let us know what you think. In the comments below, I'll respond to some of them, and probably have some follow-up questions for you as well, no doubt. And yeah, we'll see how it goes from there. I'll be back on Thursday, 4:30 PM for FLEXpectations, and next Monday for ReFLEXions again, same time. Really appreciate it, as always, and this time more than any other, I'm really looking forward to seeing your comments. Cheers.